chat. Okay, well let's start the session now. As I said, I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21, and we set out to get people to talk about the big issues of the 21st century. And we're working with GUAC in doing a series of webinars which showcases good practice, exchanges information between people who are working in the housing section, housing associations, social landlords, and people who work in partnership with them. And each time we do a webinar, we showcase a particular issue or a piece of good practice. And what we're doing in this webinar is we're looking at complex lives. Now, in our day and age, lives are complex. They're probably more complex than they've been for 2 or 3 generations. People are facing relative poverty in many cases. We're seeing the growth of single parent families and the problems that and pressures that puts on people. Often families, even single parent families, because of an aging population, are also carers as well. We're living in a gig economy where moving from job to job is becoming normal, and getting a permanent job is not easy. So the complexity in our lives is huge, and that creates problems for employability. If you're in a complex situation and you're running a complex life, how easy it is to get jobs. Well, there is help on that. And we've got 2 people who are going to join us today. One is Pat Russell, who's from APM. And APM is an organization that helps about, I think, or gives advice to about 70,000 people a year. It delivers employment in connection with a number of integrated services. And it's concerned with not just economic, but social well-being as well. And we've got Scott Parking as well from the IEP, the Institute of Employability Professionals. And they create pathways to professional career programs, and they offer events, they do training, mentoring and networking and much more. And Scott particularly has been interested in tackling the issue of complex situations and complex lives. So we're going to have both of those talking to us now. Now, remember what I said, while they talk, please type any questions or any comments you have on the right-hand side of your screen, and they will answer it when we come to the question and answer session at the end. But we also have Lindsay here, and if you would like to come on camera, Lindsay Boother is from the Give Us a Chance consortium, and she's going to just tell us first of all a little bit about GUAC and what they do and this series of webinars we're doing. So Lindsay, over to you.
Hi, thanks Francis for the intro, and I'll be really brief actually. I'm not going to talk very long at all. As Francis has said, we now are running monthly webinars on a range of topics, and as an appeal, we're always interested and open to ideas for topics or requests for speakers from GUAC members and the wider audience. We've got a good couple coming up after today, and I'm really looking forward to today. Just a bit of context, GUAC members met at the end of January with some colleagues from the DWP. Ed, I think, is here, Ed Hawker and Alex, and we talked about some of the issues that we face working with people with complex lives and supporting people into employment, and had some really good workshop discussions there. And also we're looking at the green paper around improving lives, which resonates a lot with the Work and Health programme, which is coming. So there's lots going on in this agenda in this year, and I think we'll learn a lot today from both APM and IEP. And just to give some context there, APM are an associate member of GUAC. We're really delighted to have them on board. And what that means is that they've shown a commitment to working with housing through Give Us a Chance. And they also have a very close connection to the IEP, the Institute of Employment Professionals. So Scott's going to come in there and talk as well. And I think just reflecting on that, we could do well to have a close relationship with IEP this year, and I'll consider ways in which we could do that going forwards. 2 tiny GUAC member bits of info. We have a Midlands group starting, meeting on the 6th of March in Walsall. For any GUAC members who are interested in joining the Midlands Employment Skills Group, please contact. My details can be made available at the end. And on the same day, GUAC are meeting with the NCDO URSA and the DCMS, Department for Culture, Media and Sport, to discuss what funding is what's going to happen to funding post-EU funding. So we've got a couple of things coming up, both member-driven and very different in their agenda, but I just wanted to flag those given that they are so soon coming up. So I'm really looking forward to this webinar. I will retreat from the video and sound, but I'll be around for questions and we'll be checking the comments all the way through as well. So thanks, Francis. Over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. And what we're going to do now then is start the webinar. So Pat, would you like to come on and introduce yourself? As I said, Pat is from APM. And she does a great deal of work. She's very much into the area of integrated health and care. She does a lot of voluntary work, so she knows the integration you need when you're dealing with complexity. So, Pat, would you like to join us and present your part of the webinar?
Great, Francis. Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. Some of you may know about APM and some of you may not. So I thought I'd start by just doing a little bit of an introduction to us. I joined the company about 7 months ago as the Director of Integrated Health, very much to look at how we can build on the Australian legacy, because we're an Australian company which specialises in sort of disability employment support and rehabilitation. And it acquired Pertemps PPDG, which is a Welfaretowork provider, 2 years ago, and is starting to sort of build its footprint in the UK. I think the important thing, rather than sort of trying to talk about all the things we do, is I wanted to share with you the sort of ethos of APM. It's still a family-owned business. It's still owned by one of the original founders, who is an occupational therapist. And her vision is, and our strapline is, enabling better lives. And it's about better lives for clients, for individuals, but also for communities. And their approach in Australia is very much about working in partnership. And it's something that we are bringing forward as part of our ethos into the UK business. I've known Lindsay and GUAC for many years through previous roles I've had. So it was obvious for me when I joined the company here that we absolutely should be working with GUAC members who are so committed to supporting their residents. Our aims are just simply aligned. The other thing which is really important to us as a business is about sort of innovation and learning. We're really committed to that. And just as an aside, if anybody is interested, I can pick this up separately. We've recently launched the prospectus of something we're calling APM Labs, which is about building a sort of what works type centre for employability support, which we think sort of a gap in that market. So, that's a little bit about why we see it's important to work with GUAC and GUAC members. But I'll sort of move on now, and I think Francis has very neatly turned to the presentation. And if perhaps, Francis, you could go to the next slide, and I'll start to talk us through that. Thank you. So, Francis, you'd said that the world is changing somewhat, and I think it's fair to say that many of us realise that the welfare to work market, if we can call it that, is probably getting on for about 20 years old. I think it really saw its birth in the New Deals in 1997 and all that followed that. And over time, it's grown and changed. But I think most of us would recognise that it's been sort of evolutionary rather than revolutionary. We've seen contracts change in size and structure. There used to be lots and lots of smaller contracts, but they've been getting increasingly larger. We've seen an increased focus on payment by results and so on. But I think it would be true to say that until now, much of this market has been really focused on, with funding from government, focused on the unemployment rate, on JSA customers, and a very sort of strong focus on getting Britain working. But what we can see now is real sort of policy shift emerging. So in DWP, there's a much greater focus on people who are furthest from the labour market, people who have complex lives, people particularly on employment support allowance, or people who've been on job seekers allowance for a long time. We see health commissioners now adding employment outcomes into all sorts of contracts as expected outcomes. And certainly in local authority, commissioners are much more looking at sort of outcome-based rather than service provision. And employment is sort of running throughout it all. So that's one of the sort of things that I think have been really radically changing over the last sort of year or so. I think the other thing which comes in is the D word, devolution. It's been kicking around for a while in different forms, but it is really changing the landscape out there. And I think, this is a Pandora's box that's been opened. I don't think we're going to retract for a long time, if ever, back into super large national contracts. Increasingly local authorities, councils, boroughs, whatever, want to have a much greater say in what happens in their patches. So integration and localism are becoming the sort of watchwords in many tender specifications. And I think we're also beginning to see, and this I think is where there's some real sort of challenges and opportunities, commissioners actually thinking on a more sort of system-wide level. Lindsay mentioned the green paper, and I think that is very much challenging us all to look at the big systems in which we all live. And I think increasingly we're starting to see that in sort of contracts as well, where we're starting to see people not only looking at how to get people into work, but to support them in the workplace, and indeed to look at progression, so that actually what that is not just about a small snapshot in time, but it's about reducing the sort of revolving door, about reduction in demands on services, it's about being better for the economy and productivity, and really should be better for people. Francis, if we could move on to the next slide, please. Francis? Hooray. I was warned that there might be a little bit of a delay on that. Some of the challenges ahead and what are we facing? I think, we're dealing now increasingly, and I guess, a lot of you working in housing associations will know this, but increasingly with people who've often been let down by the system, if I can put it like that. Perhaps, they just haven't had access to the support that was there. They might well be financially struggling. They may well be pulled from pillar to post by different bits of the system, often conflictingly, or indeed, in many cases, have simply fallen between the cracks. So I think there's a real challenge going ahead for people who work with clients around building trust, because these individuals are increasingly going to need support on a longer journey. And how do we start to build trust when perhaps yet another person coming along is seen as just yet another person sort of meddling in their lives? So it is very much about being there for the longer haul. I've just put this sort of line up around advisor, coach, caseworker. We see all sorts of different names. They vary from business to business. As an organisation, we have conversations about whether we should call somebody an employment coach or an employment advisor. Does it actually mean something different, or is it are they all the same? I think it is important. People do sort of think about what those words mean. Advisors advise, coaches coach. Are they different activities? But I do think, we need to think about this carefully and value what people do. just an interesting aside, we've been recruiting in APM recently for one of our contracts, and the terminology we used was caseworker. And it was surprising how many people we had applying who had never worked with people, but they'd worked on cases. They were insurance caseworkers, they were people that worked on sort of piles of paperwork in finance departments because they dealt with cases. So it just goes to show what a word is and how important it is. Some of the other challenges, working with, I put difficult local systems, not because they're inherently difficult to work with, but they are complex systems. We talk about people having complex lives, but we've got really complex systems out there. And it's all very well for commissioners to put things in ITTs that say you've got to work locally, but actually that can be quite challenging, because local could mean, in one word, at a sort of council level, a local authority level, but it could go down to much more specific local levels, down to ward level, or even estate level or street level, because of the way things are organised. And that brings a real challenge for people in our business. I think understanding health issues is really, again, something that's coming to the fore now. We tend to split things into sort of two parts, employability and health needs. In APM, we feel that's a little bit simplistic. So we're looking at more of a sort of biopsychosocial model, which actually brings all those different worlds together in one place. And there is a really big challenge, I think, to bring the clinical world closer into the employability world. And as I said up front, we're really keen on sort of innovation and learning. I think everybody always says no one's got all the answers, but I think that's genuinely true, and we'd like to see more of that. So, Francis, if we could move on to the last slide for this section.
It's there, Pat, you can speak.
Okay, all right, I can just see. Okay, I can still see the last one. It says some challenges ahead. Maybe I need to refresh my browser. Okay, so implications for the advisor role. I think credibility is really, really important. It should be dead obvious, but people need to have credibility with the clients, but also with the people that the clients deal with, whether that's local partners or friends and families or other supporters that are working with them. Advisors need to know and show that they know, their patch, that they know their craft, they know the world that they're referring to. Empathy is really important. We all know that good employers and good businesses reflect the areas that they work in and reflect their customer base. And so we should, as well as organisations work in this space. And time and again, we see that people with lived experience of the challenges that our clients are facing just seem to be much better at connecting with clients. So there's real learning there. For advisors, relationships, our business is a people business, and to help our clients succeed, advisors need to be able to build relationships quickly with, whether that's with clients or with other supporters, with providers and employers. This is no longer a desk-based job that you can do behind a sort of computer screen and simply, refer people to jobs or refer people to provision. There needs to be those relationships behind that. We're also very keen and very clear that actually to support people, we need multidisciplinary teams. Now, whether those teams are always part of a single organisation's staffing base, or whether they are multidisciplinary teams working across organisations, we see our advisors being experts in employability support, but they do need to know about health issues or disabilities. They do need to know about the challenges that a social services team might be facing. They do need to understand what it is, the way that the local GP practice works and so on. So we see multidisciplinary teams as an important feature of our world. And our advisors need to be able to engage with and see the world through the eyes of other professionals. We see advisors needing to be leaders of local systems. They will often have more of an integrator role and joining things up and joining existing services for people. And that requires leadership qualities. That's not necessarily, designated roles and jobs and so forth, but it's actually a way of working and inspiring people. Professional. I'm sure we all think we're professional in our jobs, but actually, professionalism in this sector is increasingly important. Last year, Scott and I were talking and saying that actually it can be quite difficult to sort of describe to people what we do in this business. When somebody says, what do you do? It's easy to say, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a train driver, whatever. It's quite hard. But Scott did say he started telling people that, I save people's lives. And in fact, that's what we do. We do a really, really important job. So we're changing really from being a sector to a profession. And we want people who work in this business to see themselves and behave as professionals. And lastly, but not least, something I've touched on before, is about we expect our advisors to be innovative and resourceful. Policymakers, commissioners, providers have always talked about people being individuals, but in reality, many programs have ended up being quite sort of contained, a bit of a sausage machine, whether that's by contract constraints or just delivery expediency. And it's just not going to work with the clients that we're working with now. So organisations will need to innovate, but so will advisors, and their businesses will need to be responsive to that so that systems and delivery models can be flexible as advisors need them to be. So I'm going to pause there because I've said quite a bit and potentially gone over my time, and hand over to Scott.
Hi everybody. Hi, I'm Scott Parkin. I'm the chairman of the Institute of Employability Professionals. It would be good to know if you can hear me, because I can't hear Francis. Fantastic. Thank you, Alan. That's great. Really brilliant. Okay. Well, I'll carry on then. Thanks, Pat. It's interesting to know the profession is moving forward in the same direction, albeit some organisations that are faster paced, piloting and testing new approaches, and that will become a necessity over the coming year. Anyway, my job is to talk to you all about where I feel the challenges are moving forward and the opportunity they presents us all. I'm also interested in opening a dialogue with you all, as it's very important to us all that we provide employment support that has synergy and that we all work together to better deliver services for our customers. Truly delivering the IP is dedicated to supporting those people who support others, gain work, progressing work, and sustain work. Okay, so can you share the slides, please, Francis? That's great, thank you. And can we move on to the second slide, please? Okay, just really quickly wanting to reiterate what Pat was saying. It's a very important time for our profession, and as such, we need to think more innovatively about how we go about what we do. The employability sector is changing. It will become more integrated, and as such, those working within it will require knowledge, understanding, and the ability to broker successful partnership relationships for the benefit of the customer. The future advisor needs to be highly skilled, energetic, creative, knowledgeable, with a strong focus on professional development. They need to be empathetic, patient, and understanding, less traditionally target-driven and more customer-focused. They need to be agile and resourceful and able to promote a positive mindset and have the ability to work within an integrated service environment to provide joined-up support for customers in elements, some of the things that people were saying around the integrated service and the key worker scenario. They need to be able to manage a range of relationships, be a leader of local systems, as Pat said, and speak with credibility and authority. They need to be able to build those trusted, established relationships with customers and support them through their journey. And that journey needs to cross over all aspects of their lives. And they need to understand the individual health issues and complex needs and the knowledge to know where they can get and refer help to. So they need to be connected. Next slide, please, Francis. So there are many things that are going to affect our profession over the coming year and beyond, and it would be pretty easy to categorize them into three groups. So the first one is those people looking for work. So the complexity of people looking for work is changing. Although I'm acutely aware of my time at Advance, that these groups have been supporting people successfully with complex and high support needs for a very long time. And we as a profession have much to learn from the experience that GUAC members and other housing associations and other organisations of that ilk, as it were, have gained. Support will be given to those with the most acute need, and as such, there may be people who simply do not get access. I feel the government is possibly being somewhat naive in thinking that a problem of long-term unemployment is solved. My opinion is that there's still much to do to support people from all areas of society, and clearly we're here to do this. Job Centre Plus will be delivering more advisory services at the front end, and the workforce that they have in work coaching is relatively new, and one that they cannot rely upon from the previous DEA skill set across the country, as a number of these roles were removed over the last few years. The IEP has delivered both written and verbal submissions to the Work and Pension Select Committee, citing real support for getting this right, but highlighting concerns over the capacity of JCP to deliver what is required given their planned training programme. Added to this, the issue around local services being cut due to austerity. This is the same for public sector services that have seen cuts, and thus access for support is limited, and for those organisations that for years relied on local funding to deliver much needed services at the heart of the community that now simply do not exist. Life is going to get even harder for those people looking for work. Benefits are being cut in real terms, and access to traditional funding and financial support is becoming more difficult to obtain. For example, I don't know whether you know, but it's now a qualifying period of 9 months to qualify for any mortgage interest relief, which has moved from 3 months a year ago. This means that poverty will quicken as prices rise, along with inflation in our shops. This also goes for people who are now on low wages, and can also be forecasted for those people who are in the fortunate position of owning their own home when interest rate increases occur, probably later in the year. I'd be interested to hear what organisations like yours, the people on this webinar, are doing to counteract price rises around rent payments and other elements like that. So when we look at those people in work, wage growth has slowed and the cost of living is rising. It would be argued that generic unemployment, and I use the term generic loosely, is now not the issue it once was. Well, at least until there is another downturn in the economy. And through specialist programs, those with complex or high support needs will be supported. What happens to the estimated 7 million people who are in or close to in-work poverty? Those people trying to hold down 2, 3, 4 jobs to make ends meet for themselves and their families. This, I believe, is a ticking time bomb, and one that government should be giving urgent attention to. The lack of affordable housing is a problem when it comes to those families that are just about managing, as they are reliant on services that maybe they would not need if housing was more available. It could be argued that the government has been slow to act in this area and still needs to do much more. This is also affected by the need to balance the public purse, and in JCP terms, that relies on no economic downturn at all, and the increase in customer wages, and thus the reduction in the value of universal credit payments. This is difficult in the fact that we do not have the expected economic growth, albeit that it is better than the first forecasted back in the spring, and that wage growth linked to living standards is the worst it's been for over 100 years. Practically, how does an advisor with little training or understanding coach a customer to discuss an increase in hours and or wages, or even more potentially, problematically, discuss the requirement with the employer? Lastly, there is the issue around changing work patterns, the increase in self-employment and the gig economy, as Francis talked about earlier. There is some argument that self-employment and zero-hour contracts and many other mechanisms not only provide for instability in our working population, but have also created a false impression about the success of the country getting people back to work. So what about those organisations that are supporting people? We do not know yet the makeup of the Work and Health Programme, and whilst this is not the only show in town, it's an important development over the coming year. It's clear that the design in full still needs to happen, and it's also clear that there's much to influence and comment on. The IP have just made its submission to the Work, Health and Disability consultation, and this has provided the department with a vision that is defined by the front line, those people actually doing the jobs. And they're at the heart of future delivery. The apprenticeship levy provides for a unique experience to finally tackle UK PLC issues around productivity. Career progression has had little focus throughout our economy, and I genuinely hope this will make a difference. The flip side to this is that most organisations will use the levy for high skills and for those people that have been in the business for some time, diminishing in some ways and in varying different degrees the opportunity for young people to get a start. Added to this is the challenge. Added to this challenge is the fact that many organisations do not understand some of the key principles and as such do not grasp the agreed differences and thus delivery opportunities between professional qualifications and the competencies and work-related training. There are regulations, especially in the HCA, I'm sure all of you know, work with this every day, around customer feedback and satisfaction. Annual surveys are common, and the publication of these value for money reports is now commonplace. These can be powerful examples of an organisation's ability to deliver against need, and from my limited experience, I've started viewed along with other formal mechanisms to judge an organisation's ability to manage HCA grants effectively, and even as far as their ability to attract such grants in the first place. I thought it best to mention, although I'll do briefly, Brexit, but I don't want to labour the point. At this current time, it creates an environment of uncertainty, and as such is not great for those customers or organisations alike. Access to funding from Europe is yet to be defined, and those organisations who utilise such funding will be concerned about the sustainability of projects they run. It also creates concern around legislation and rights, particularly workers' rights. For those example, those with a disability have over 500 protections gained from Europe, and there is yet to be a clear picture on what happens next. Added to Brexit is the uncertainty around devolution, and both the lack of clarity and the massive variance around timetabling. Those organisations that work across Devo boundaries will be having numerous and different conversations that require resource and understanding that is unique to that area. We all know, of course, the population is ageing. Creates an environment where organisations that support people, particularly around social care, healthcare and housing, will need to provide services for a much longer period of time. This creates challenges around funding in the social care system that is already fit to bursting point. And that's not supported by a healthcare system that concentrates mainly on emergency and acute care and provides for little integration into social care. Next slide, please, Francis. So it looks challenging, doesn't it? But we all know where there's a challenge, there's also a unique and genuine opportunity. So what do we need to do on the ground to make this work? We need to, of course, work in partnership with like-minded organisations to improve service delivery and the integration between different areas of employment support provision. Closer collaboration between organisations and agencies to influence change, and the key worker type approach to referrals, to employment support, and providing a holistic delivery model. So, you know, in a nutshell, more collaboration and more co-location. We need digital technology to be useful, enabling multi-agency integration, providing genuinely joined up support for customers, enabling a customer to tell their story once and that be recorded for all agencies to use as and when support is needed. We need a greater understanding of customers' overall needs, their type and level support required. We need to understand the causes and not just the symptoms. We need a tailored approach to service delivery, and this is to be part of commissioning, the use of past performance data when awarding contracts. And we need to involve customers in the design and the implementation of new services. And of course, we need localization. We need local answers to local problems. Next slide, please. Now, the IEP is the membership body for employability professionals across all sectors. And we've just revised our vision statement, and we've come to the conclusion, quite rightly, that we are dedicated to supporting the people who support others gain work, progress in work, and retain work. Our vision is to empower individuals to perform to a professional standard through gaining relevant further knowledge and understanding, building their skills and acting in accordance with the IEP stated values. We want to champion employability as a recognised profession through representation of our people's social and economic contribution and achievements to policymakers and influencers. We want to secure employers' recognition that their employability objectives are best achieved through a commitment to the development through selection and training of a highly skilled professional delivery team. And we, of course, want to create a network of opportunity so we can enable this vision to be achieved. Next slide, please, Francis. So who do we work with? I'm not going to go through the list. Hopefully you guys can see that. It's quite extensive. And we want it to be extensive, more and more extensive as we go through this year. The more and more people that we engage with this kind of centralized focus, and the more people we get on board with the genuine belief that we have to and should improve services for our customers, because that's the only thing that matters, then the more successful we will be. So we work with people who work in employability wherever they deliver their employment support, and those organisations with an interest and or affiliation with this area of social policy. Next slide, please, Francis. So there are generally many ways that IEP can help offset the challenges we're facing and the need for to develop both a more integrated approach to delivery and the need for higher skill levels for those people delivering support. So we deliver accessible resources that will best assist anyone delivering employability support. We support the changing marketplace and both lead and comment on policy and delivery changes. We develop materials that are fit for purpose and that keep pace with change. We enable with delivery organisations and individuals to make sure that best practice is shared. We provide simple and effective networks where people can share and gain knowledge. We broaden the reach and highlight the value of employability, linking people together for mutual benefit. We build career pathways and develop qualifications that support vertical and horizontal movement. And we work with influencers on collaborative projects that raise standards and build sector skills. We also work with specialist training and develop specialist training for frontline staff and provide opportunities for CPD. We have an endorsed by IEP training qualifications service, and that is delivered from a range of leading providers. We provide specialist advice and techniques that help anyone delivering employment support understand the range of needs of customers and the range of need that they have when seeking employment. We advise on how to best accommodate these needs and provide practical solutions to support them into sustained employment. We share ideas, best practice, and of course, next practice. We have access to a mentoring program, and we provide networking opportunities. We have a 10 things guide, which is fascinating. It reduces the fear of anyone working in employment support when they meet a customer with a particular challenge for the first time. The most recent one was around sight loss, and it really, really helps an advisor that maybe isn't or hasn't come across that challenge before to really understand what needs to happen. We of course have qualifications. We have the 10 theme guides I've mentioned. We have a program of affiliation, and we have a recognised induction program. And we are always looking for innovative projects that drive change. We are currently very, very close to launching a Disability Confident campaign with a corporate affiliate partner of ours, where people with disabilities who work for the organisation will actually be leading sessions and delivering services and advice and guidance to both employers and people within the profession to try and kind of spearhead that agenda and move it forward from the government's innovative stance in the first place. And we're very excited about that. So I'd like to just say on the last slide, please, Francis. On the last one, please, Francis, sorry. I just want to say thank you very much for your time. I'll pass on my contact details to you all to engage in a conversation. As you can see, I like to talk, so the conversation is always welcome. And I really do look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you very much.
great. That was two really good presentations, and if you're both on there, that's great. This is a time where we can ask questions and make comments, and quite a few questions have comments have come up already. Pat, I mean, one of the points that have come up again and again is we need to educate employers. I mean, you've got people with complex needs, you've got complex situations, and employers are very sort of dubious about the employability of people who might take time off all the time. They've got all sorts of problems they have to face. How do you work with employers to actually realize that people in these situations are definitely employable, and that without taking them into account, they're going to lose out?
That's a really good question, and I think the answer, which I'm sure many people in the on the webinar and who work in this space will know, is that we have to move from what was perhaps a sort of traditional job broking method, which was often a sort of built around going to an employer, saying, you know, let's do a deal, give us all your jobs, and we've got lots of people who can fill them, to working the opposite way around. And you actually start with the individual, and then you go and seek employers who might meet the sort of needs and profile of the individual. Now, you know, clearly organisations like ours and in localities, I'm sure employment advisors in housing associations as well, will have employers that have worked with them before and where there's an element of trust built up. But it is very much about working with employers' needs and understanding, you know, where there are gaps in their business. And so we do a number of things. We have to sort of be quite flexible. We often talk to employers and get them to think about, you know, what would happen? Who's the most important sort of frontline person in their business? You know, we throw them a challenge like that, and they'll say, oh, well, it's you know, who does that, or it's Fred in payroll, or it's something like that. And we say, well, you know, if you know, Fred suddenly developed Parkinson's disease, or was involved in a motorcycle accident and lost an arm or something like that, would you sack him? And then they go, no, of course we wouldn't, because, you know, he's very valuable and we can do that. And we sort of play that back, and that sometimes sort of gets through to people that perhaps they sort of misjudge people. I think one of the things that is very important, and actually it's not just for people with health conditions and disabilities, but actually it's quite good practice, is you know, work experience and work trials and opportunities like that. So those work really well indeed. And we do find that once we've worked with employers who had, you know, stayed with us and shown the faith, that very often the clients will sustain in work and will become very sort of loyal employees, and very often that leads the way to those employers being both advocates amongst their peers, but also opening up to other jobs.
Okay, Scott actually has said his connection's gone down, but the gods are on our side because we got his presentation before it went down, so that's really great. Madhavi is talking about disability and employers not taking that into account. I mean, what can you do, and the Institute as well, to help in those circumstances, Pat?
Sorry, I missed the start of that. Apologies.
Oh, no, one of the contributors, Madhavi, has said that there are real problems about people with disabilities. I mean, that's a particular complex problem that some people have, and employers not really taking account of that. And what sort of help can you give in showing there's employability factors there?
Sure. Well, I mean, so again, this is where we very much work in partnership. So there are lots of organisations around who will actually work with employers to help them think through some of their HR strategies and think about that. There's organisations like, you know, the Business Disability Forum. There's an organisation called Purple, which is doing quite a lot of gig work as well. And those are organisations that can go in and help employers just understand really from a sort of business bottom line point of view. So I think one of the things we've got to think about is how we frame these discussions with employers. This isn't about corporate social responsibility anymore. This isn't about doing good in the neighbourhood. This is a sort of business bottom line discussion. There are loads of resources around with organisations that can provide guidance and help to employers. And then there are very specific things. So we certainly offer in-work support to employers and individuals, so that if somebody's wobbling a bit and there's a potential problem, then either the client or the employer can give our advisors a ring and help resolve the problem. And we've done a bit of a look at some of our contracts over that, and we've found that by having that available to employers, some 70% of people where employers have contacted us because there's been a problem with a person, we've been able to keep that person in work sort of 70% of the time. So that's quite a good return, because otherwise, without that in-work support, those individuals might well have dropped out for all sorts of reasons that are quite resolvable.
Okay, I think Scott has probably come back, and Lindsay, if you want to come on and ask any questions, please do. You're very, very welcome. I mean, Sally, I think, was saying, and others, that what you've been saying and what Scott's been saying is really, really applicable to their customer base and anyone working in that particular area. So, for example, if you're a housing association, a social landlord, you also have a responsibility as well, don't you, to actually understand that complex lives linked with complex situations, as you said, means a special effort to develop partnerships, to do place-based work, and to have an integrated approach. Is that something you would sort of agree with, Pat?
Absolutely. I think it's sort of really important, and yeah. You've asked me a closed question. Yes, I agree with it. I don't know whether Lindsay wants.
No. Okay, I did something that you should, as an interviewer.
No, I know. I should have
ask a closed question. Yeah. Okay, but let's go to Scott. I mean, do you give help in integrating services and employers in that integrated system in any way? So someone comes to you and say, how can we increase employability? Do you talk about the partnerships and the networking that has to go on?
I think, Francis, I mean, it happens quite organically in some senses, and then it's very well organized in others. So it happens quite organically because a number of our organizations that we've been working for a number of years with are now integrating services across different sectors. So, I mean, the closest line is justice, there's of course health, and there's employability support that fits around those aspects. But we're very clear as well as an organization to get as many people from as many organizations, as many kind of fundamental practices to be involved in the same room in a networking environment to try and share those ideas and experiences. And we have done a considerable amount of work with some local authorities, albeit within London mainly, to try and understand what they're providing around employability support, how their integrated systems are working, and what other services they provide that rely on that requirement in some way for employability support. So the answer is yes, and we're happy to work with anyone to try and connect those dots, as it were.
Okay, Lindsay, do you have any point you want to raise?
Thanks, Francis. I thought I'd just jump in there. I thought there was some really interesting comments that we need to address and consider about affordable housing and the lack of that, and how that links to creating more complex lives and issues for people that actually could be avoided. And there's a lot to unpack there, but I think it's something that I will take away from one of the points that Scott made. And I think it's almost obvious, but it's absolutely the case that the role of housing associations is transformed in the last 10 years. And welfare reform plus a better understanding of employment services and the sector, actually, of employment services has had a major role in changing the way housing thinks about what its job is. And, GUAC wouldn't exist if that transformation hadn't happened and been happening. So it's not just about roofs over heads and the collection of rent. It is much more about well-being of people and tenancies, and supporting communities into sustainable livelihoods. The kind of terminology that was preserved for international development programs 10, 15, 20 years ago is now coming into the mainstream for what we do here in our own communities. And I think that's right. I think this year for me and for GUAC, getting closer to working with IEP and understanding that crossover role will be really important. Some of the comments that have come up on the sidebar today are really talking about the similarity when you talk about the qualities and skills that we're looking for in good employment advisors over with housing and the customer-facing side of housing businesses who are dealing with people day to day and who have to have very similar skills and approaches. So I think it seems sensible to me that we come together and understand how to share that more widely and perhaps more consistently this year. And my last plug and hope for comment, Scott and Pat, you've mentioned disability confidence. And we are keen to push awareness of that and to encourage as many employers as can to take that up and to challenge them where there are objections. No tool is perfect, but I think it's a good start, and it's there, it's out in the marketplace, and I think we should be using it. Plus better support and knowledge for employers on support like access to work, and the support that offers through the DWP has come through very clearly from GUAC members as an information gap and an information need, which would help, I think, employers to get over the line quicker with things like disability confidence and signing those pledges. So that's it from me. Thanks.
Okay, great. As you said, there are quite some interesting comments coming up on the side about skills and qualifications. Someone's mentioned an MVQ level 3 and so on. So it's worth looking at those comments. One thing you said, Pat, earlier, and Maldivi again is saying, we've got to get through the bureaucracy. And one of the bureaucracies I think you mentioned was the whole idea of commissioning. Is commissioning a real problem in sort of getting an integrated approach in terms of complex needs and employability? Is commissioning still too restricted in the way it operates?
I think it is one of the sort of big challenges. I think there's there's quite understandably a desire for commissioners to make sure that the funding that they have is targeted where it's intended to go, whoever is sort of behind that, whether it's local or national politicians. And then that tends to drive quite sort of detailed specification. I think also, it then, we're certainly seeing, and I know that housing association colleagues will see it as well, that in some areas you get, shed loads of initiatives coming along where actually there's all sorts of programs which in some places almost start to compete for individuals. I know there are some parts of London, people tell me that they're almost fighting over the clients because they're so similar, but you've got big lottery funding and you've got local authority funding and you've got a DWP initiative and another. So I think there's some challenges there about what commissioners want. I think there's also some interesting things we're seeing around whether commissioners really understand what they're asking for. And I'm thinking particularly in the health world where they're starting to ask for employment outcomes. And we've been talking to a number of sort of NHS trusts that are running quite innovative pilots on paper. But they've all been sort of completely contained within an NHS world. So there's a sort of an employment outcome built into some of these things, and yet it's all still being delivered by clinicians with no recognition that helping somebody get a job or to deal with their housing or whatever requires, different types of professional support. And again, that's very much down to, commissioners getting what they ask for rather than the fault of delivery organisations.
Okay, I noticed, Scott, that you've actually put on that there's an employability apprenticeship trailblazer, and that sounds quite interesting in the context of what we're discussing here today. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, if you can hear me, sorry. Yes, I mean, it is very, very exciting, and it's something we've been working on for some time and have genuinely struggled so far to get off the ground. I think a number of things have come into perfect focus more recently. The apprenticeship levy, the organisations that deliver traditionally in the employability sector are looking more expansively in terms of how they deliver services, that integrated approach, and that support for people in many different ways. So yes, we are embarking and already quite a way down the process now of learning from our colleagues who have done this kind of work in the justice sector already. And the idea basically is that as an employer, there is a benefit because, of course, the levy can be spent on using this to educate people in this way. Those organisations that are working within the space have multifaceted delivery. So they may deliver in justice, they may deliver social care service, they may deliver in healthcare. And what they want to do is have a workforce that can be wonderfully transient within that employer. So there are many, many different reasons. And it seems that everything's collided at the right time for this to be really genuinely purposeful and can make a real difference. I think before, and the last thing I'll say, I think before we've been slightly pigeonholey in terms of how, and I know that's not the right statement, but in terms of how we've gone about this work, and we've been very singularly focused on getting somebody a job. And now is the time to think about all the multifaceted approaches that we need to make somebody's life better.
Okay, and Maddie, we said that you'd like a list of that and like to be in contact with you. So maybe you could look at that comment and maybe follow up with him because he's really, really interested. Pat, is one of the things that you can say to employers, look, people who have complex needs, they just have complex needs. They're very talented people, many of them. They have lots of skills, they've got lots of aptitudes, lots of abilities. And if you don't use them, you're going to be less efficient. You're going to be losing out. Is there ways in which you can say, as long as we can get the systems in place, there is a great, great asset out there for you, and you should consider it? Yeah, you need your microphone on. Sorry about that. I turned it. We can hear you now.
You're absolutely right, and that is part of the sort of high-level dialogue around the sort of business-to-business piece here. I appreciate that's easier in some parts of the country where, in the southeast, where there's pretty much full employment by and large. That's easier to have those conversations. And looking at some of the comments that people have made, it's evident. But if you're a busy employer, if you're a hairdresser and you employ 20 people, you haven't got time to sort of think about these things always. So I think there is, it's a bit of a slow burn, and it does need to be done sort of almost employer by employer, and then some will see the light. I mean, there are some large employers that we know who, big national companies that have excellent policies around this and are very committed at a very high level. But when you go into the local store manager has got targets to make and will sort of default to what they know best. So the arguments are sort of pretty clear cut. There's loads of evidence, but it's the hearts and minds job that's going to take quite a long time. And there's also, and linked to that, I think there's a wider sort of societal set of issues around not understanding and indeed discriminating against people with disabilities and health conditions. I mean, in terms of resources, and I've there've been some questions asked about where can we get access to organisations that can help and that can go in and do disability awareness training. There isn't a single list as such that's definitive. A lot of these organisations will be sort of local. But if you do go onto the Disability Confident links into gov.uk and you work through and have a look at it, if you go into, particularly if you go into sort of level 2 element of it, that's the level where you have to sort of complete a self-assessment to demonstrate if you are a disability confident employer. And what is really helpful there is there are loads and loads of links to things that are helpful to employers. And so I've certainly within APM, we do training for our own staff using the disability confident sort of narrative, because they are then going out and talking to employers about it. So they're talking to them through an employer-facing product. So I would certainly recommend that, and go in there and have a rootle around. And there you will find lots of links to good resources online, links to organisations that can help with specific impairments, for example. And at the end, there's a link of organisations that are disability confident employers, which is the level 2 qualified, who offer these sort of services, and that's a list that's building as well. So that's certainly a place to go.
Okay, I noticed, Scott, that one of the comments you put on was that remote working is one of the way of the future. So, if an employer is looking at a situation that they've got problems, is that something you recommend? Look, there are alternative ways of working, and the digital age makes that possible. So is a part of your job to try and help an employer, as well as help a client, a person who wants work, to realise they can do it in a different way?
I think it's a very good point. I think, having the conversation is really important. I think we wouldn't, as an organisation, as the Institute, have that direct access to the employer, but we will certainly help and do help providers of services, those individuals providing employment support, with ways and mechanisms to engage with that employer more effectively. So yes, I think, I was suggesting that remote working from a delivery point of view is a key focus. We are working in this digital age. We are working where funding is tight and people do deliver services within the local community and have done for some time. And we need to make sure that the principles are there, that the standards are there across the piece, and that people in that remote sense are able to access the resources they need to do the best job possible, and that they are acting in the capacity. Because actually, those individuals that have been at the heart of the community, co-located, whatever you want to call it, for a number of years, have been doing the stakeholder management. They've been doing the key workers. They've been doing those kinds of models. And actually, the vision for the future, or certainly the IEP's expectation, and I know APM share some of this, is that more of that will happen. That standard of individual to do that will be required. And they will need the learning and the development to be able to do that effectively. Okay.
Well, we're coming quite close to the end, but maybe we could take one more question for you, Pat. Scott's talked about moving into different ways of working, digital working, and so on. We've talked about actually developing partnerships at the local level between all sorts of different people. We've talked really about a whole new approach to employability, to work, to society in which we live. One of the things you said early, I think probably is quite important. To do that, you need trust. And trust underlines all of those new ways of working and creating of those networks and partnerships. Now, how do you sort of embed trust into the thing you do? How do you get people to learn to trust each other so that it really works?
Okay, so I talked about trust at a number of levels, but let's just pick up trust between potential partner organisations rather than maybe trust with clients. I think there's been, there's been a lot of false starts in this, and there've been sort of examples I know where providers have won contracts. I think we can safely say the work program contracts were a bit like this when they were launched, and providers who came in to deliver that sort of very often came into localities. Phrase I've heard used is sort of parachuted in and just sort of took over. So I think there's something about the basic level is about a sort of personal relationship, a person-to-person relationship, and we certainly envisage in our business going forward that not only our advisors but our managers are representatives on the ground of this business and of this ethos. And so we're looking at our business managers being our partnership managers going forward. We're not envisaging as we deliver contracts to have separate partnership managers that sort of do partnership working. And I think that's, personal relationships really important. I think it's really important also that it's going to be really hard for people if the ethos of the business isn't behind that. So from our Australian parent company to our CEO and senior managers here, we certainly believe that we've got to be as open as possible with people, and we operate on a sharing as much data as we can principle. Certainly sharing things like performance information so that we can help improve services, and being quite open about what our ambitions are and where our problems are, and seeking to sort of resolve problems together. I think that at one level can be quite commercially it can feel quite exposed, but I think if we do that and we find and work with people that have the same sort of beliefs and values, then actually we do experience that we get a much better outcome all round for both our service and our clients.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for doing that. I mean, I think we've come to the end of the session now, and I think we got through it with only one or two sort of technical glitches. And so I'm sighing a big sigh of relief for that. And I think your presentations have been great, and your answers have been, really illuminating. So thank you for doing that. And I hope you enjoyed the experience of doing the webinar. And thanks for all the questions everyone's put up and the links and the suggestions they've made. And that's great. And Lindsay, for your contribution about the role of GUAC and about collaborating and partnerships and so on. I think it's all worked very well. So I hope you all have enjoyed this webinar. And as I say, these are monthly webinars that we hope to be doing gradually with GUAC, and we've got the next two already beginning to be set up. So I hope you have all enjoyed it and you will join our future webinars. So I'm going to end by putting up our end caption, and then that will mean the webinar is closed. So thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you again at another time. So goodbye for now.